Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to quickly set the stage so you all have some context. Firstly, my name is Sean, and I'm a senior associate here at 500. My job is to largely work with a number of corporate investors and innovators on projects related to startup investment and startup partnerships. This event is being hosted as part of our ongoing Slack community titled 500 VC, an invite only group for corporates and institutional investors to engage in helpful conversation, networking, and ultimately empower founders. If you're interested in joining 500 VC, please feel free to shoot me an email, which I'll drop in the chat shortly. Regarding this event, CVC Insider, this is a bi weekly speaker series featuring top corporate venturing practitioners sharing their unique journey to CVC, specific challenges, and best practices they've developed as a result. We will have Q&A on, so feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section and we'll do our best to cover them. Now that you know who we are and what's going on, I'm going to pass it over to Nicolas to kick things off. Enjoy.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you 500 Startups for making this series happen. This is really useful for the corporate venturing ecosystem, especially for those who are just getting started. Today, we have a really special guest and a great CVC, award-winning CVC. So our guest is Francis Ho, SVP and co-head of the Samsung Catalyst Fund. He's a Power List number 5 from the Global Corporate Venturing. And today he's got a few good news. Some of his team members got the Rising Star and the Emerging Leaders Award. So clearly they're doing something right. And today I'm looking forward to learning what they're doing so right so that we can all raise the bar. On top of that, I think Francis will be sharing a really good news this morning. He just can confirm. So Francis, all yours. If you can share a little about your personal journey and about Samsung Catalyst Fund, that would be really good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Nicolas. Thank you, Sean. And very honored to have the chance to talk to you today. Hopefully share some of our experiences here. As Nicolas just alluded to, very excited about a couple of our team members, Nicolas Autre and Radhika Malik, receiving the Emerging Leaders and Rising Stars Award from Global Corporate Venturing. Thank you to them also. I'm very proud of them. And this morning is especially interesting and fun and exciting for us because one of our portfolio investments, Preventus Solutions, is being acquired by Boston Scientific for $1.2 billion. So exciting event. And we've been partnering with them for several years now. So really amazing to see that the dream that they had from the beginning is becoming a larger and larger reality. So with that, maybe I can give a quick intro to Samsung Catalyst Fund and talk a little bit about, I guess, my journey, my personal journey. I have a kind of odd and strange journey, so it should be interesting to discuss. Samsung Catalyst Fund, of course, is the corporate VC arm of Samsung, and our mission is to help Samsung to navigate the future by, partnering with the top VCs and investing in the best startups in what we call strategic technologies and markets. So for that, we focus on deep tech, which essentially are the foundational technologies such as semiconductors, algorithms, AI, the cloud, sensors, connectivity, wireless. These are the things that makes the bits move, right? And it causes the world to go around. The fact that we can talk today is only possible now with the huge amounts of work by all of us in the ecosystem. 10 years ago, not so much. So it's amazing how quickly that's changing. And so we also invest, though, on the other side, which is the services down the road, because we believe that only by understanding where the services are going, can we understand what will be required from technology, from the deep tech in the next generation. So specifically, we focus on healthcare and life sciences. We focus on mobility, on fintech, and so on. So my role here is I help to lead the fund together with a very talented global team of managing directors and investors. And we're based in North America. I'm in Silicon Valley, sitting in Palo Alto right now, but office is normally on Sand Hill and Menlo Park. Office in New York City, in Berlin, Paris, Herzliya, Israel, and of course in Korea, where our headquarters is for the parent company. Although Samson Catalyst Fund is based out here in Silicon Valley. My own focus has been in deep tech areas like semiconductors, data center, AI, quantum computing, and also since I joined Samsung 8 years ago, really began to go deeply into healthcare and life sciences, areas like genomics and digital health. So, odd combination. Let me explain how I got here. I began really in science. I did my undergrad and PhD degrees in physics, undergrad at Caltech, PhD at Stanford, focused on really more practical aspects. Even though it was physics, I was focused on building leading edge instruments to measure very fast, very small things. So, for example, my thesis was on this technology called atomic force microscopy. I went from there to become a postdoc, which means you do research beyond what you did in your PhD. I worked in quantum optics at Stanford again, and this actually is the forerunner to quantum computing. So for me, it's been amazing to actually come back to like 20 years later and invest. It turns out in my classmate from that same research group. So very,
Oh, wow.
fortunate circumstance. Um, Ion Q. So after my postdoc, this was about 95 now. So you recall that was the time when, there was Netscape, Yahoo, this is before Google, but Silicon Valley was just hopping. And it was about the new technologies like the cloud, it wasn't called the cloud yet, the internet, I guess, right? And all the amazing technologies there. So I knew at that point that, okay, maybe I shouldn't focus on academia. Maybe I should try to go to industry and try to commercialize these amazing technologies. So I transitioned from scientific research into industry. And I did that by joining first this company called Schlumberger, a very well-known large company. I joined the part of the company that was making test equipment for semiconductors because I was working on instruments. So it correlated very well with my expertise. And that was my path to begin kind of on this more business side of my journey. In that time, I've been very fortunate. It's kind of like right place in the right time and being ready. I was fortunate to be part of 3 startups, 2 IPOs, and 1 M&A. So the first startup was called ONI Systems. I learned about optical networking, about telecom industry. This was IPO in NASDAQ 2000. Second startup was called Siloquent. It's a Israeli-based company. I was the first hire in the US. I was the marketing guy trying to get design wins. And I learned how to work with a remote headquarter. I learned about Israel, an amazing country and people, and learned about the data center. And the technology there was about 10 gigabit Ethernet, these 10 gigabit cluster interconnect chips to scale out compute. What we take for granted today in AI training, for example, the foundation of that one foundations is the cluster interconnect technology, which I was a part of back then. So RDMA and so on. This was acquired by Broadcom. So, nice outcome. And my third startup is called Inphi. And this is a company, another chip company that is focused on high-speed interconnect for data center in the cloud. This went public on the New York Stock Exchange in 2010. I was able to bring my family, go to the floor of the exchange, have the experience of amazing bell ringing ceremony. So really, really fun. 10 years apart, 2 IPOs and 1 M&A. Again, I think I was just fortunate to be at the right place at the right time. And I guess I tended to want to follow great leaders also. So that's maybe one lesson learned. It's like, think about the people you're working with. In the case of Inphi, for example, there were many ups and downs, but I knew that the people I was working with were like A plus. So it turned out okay. In between, also joined McKinsey, the consulting firm, to learn about business and strategy. And I got into VC because I joined JP Morgan Partners at some point. This is the private equity part of JP Morgan. It's interesting. It's a sort of a corporate VC, but it was purely financially driven, but it had only one LP. So it's kind of a hybrid, right? So I learned about VC investments over there. And then I came to Samsung 8 years ago because my prior company, Infi, my CEO was Young Son, an amazing leader in Silicon Valley. Young was asked by Samsung to start a new innovation group in Samsung, and I was his first hire for this. And we came here, and our mission was to build help Samsung build new businesses by using what we call tools like investment, M&A, innovation combined under one roof, and use a synergistic method to promote new directions and help Samsung see the future better. So we built out the team over the past 8 years. We founded Samsung Catalyst Fund eight years ago. We quickly got one of our old partners, Shankar Chandran from JP Morgan, to join us to run the fund. And it's been an amazing 8-year journey. So that's kind of the long and winding story.
Actually, this is an amazing story. I think I only knew half of it. So I feel like you're being too humble when you say you were at the right place at the right time. Clearly, 2 IPOs and everything you've achieved and being the first pick for Young Son is much more than being at the right place at the right time. Let me pick on something personal from your profile. And I want to understand how much of that do you think it's useful in corporate venturing or not? You have a PhD, which means that you have went very deep into something that very few people know. How much do you think your PhD is giving you a perspective or a way to look at things that helps you in corporate venturing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. First of all, I'm focused on the deep tech side, and even when I focus on the services side, many of those things are pretty complex in terms of the underlying principles. For example, medical technologies, right? Life science, biotech. So the kind of VC I do happens to be deeply connected to science. It would not be the case if I were investing in other very interesting topics, let's say um, pure fintech or social networking and things like that. So certainly some VCs require different kinds of skills, for sure. If you're going to invest in these deeply technical scientific areas, it is very helpful to have a strong technical background. I've met many people though who have English literature backgrounds, yet they're very knowledgeable about areas like networking, very technical areas. So it's not so much that you have to have the right degree. It's more like you're willing to commit your life, your career to understanding something deeply, and then you're smart and all that. So it's not so much the degree, but there's a correlation, I guess, right? Because you chose to go that direction. In my case, I was saying in the beginning, we invested in this company called IonQ, which is a quantum computing company using ion traps. And the idea is that using ions, which are just atoms minus one electron, it's a charged atom called an ion, you can build perfect quantum bits. So what I just said, the sentences I just said, these are a bunch of technical jargon in a way. If you don't know what it means, it's really difficult to do much. You can just kind of be a cheerleader for the company. So to do anything useful for the company, including, by the way, winning the opportunity to do a deal, anything that's very exciting, there's competition, you have to build the right relationships with the team, the board, and so on. It helps to be able to show that you can actually help the company in the future. And to do that for these very technical topics, you need to have in-depth knowledge. So it really comes, I think, from a mindset, because this quantum computing example was very fortunate and lucky, because I happened to be doing quantum optics directly related 20 years ago. But most of the deals I do are not like that, right? So the company I mentioned earlier, Preventus, what they do is a cardiac patch. It's a sticker on your chest. It measures the ECG rhythm from your heart. It transmits it to the cloud. Their technicians, augmented by AI, look for odd patterns in the rhythm, and they warn your physician so that something can be done, saving people's lives. Now, I know nothing from any of that from my prior degrees, so is complete divorced from any specific knowledge. It's really just a mindset. So any one of us with the right curiosity can learn that. But it's really committing yourself to learn beyond what you have to do just to get the job done. It's knowing underneath that. And here's the final thing about that. The payoff is not only for that specific deal you're doing, which it can help you. The real payoff is that you start to see a pattern. You see a pattern connecting even things like life sciences and IT and computer science. Sounds very different. They're deeply connected these days. Like, it is impossible to have our COVID vaccine from Moderna and Pfizer so quickly without the deep, deep connection with data. So if you don't understand what's underneath, you can't see that in advance of the reality coming out by big press releases. So to be early, you have to know the patterns underneath. So that's, I think, the biggest reason to go deeper.
I think you've given us a few golden nuggets here, but let me touch on the one you mentioned, which I think is important, about winning a deal. Clearly, a lot of what you discussed is about finding the right opportunity, the right investment, the one you believe will outperform. But then you still need, once you've decided this is the one you want to invest, you still need to convince the entrepreneurs, the startups, and the syndicate to let you in and to invest. And I think what you mentioned about showing that you know a lot and you can bring value is really important. Can you give us an example, a concrete example of value you have added after an investment, not during the due diligence, but actually after the investment, which really helped the startup go into the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is now not about me, right? This is about us as a team. And let me just say something about that. At Samson Catalyst Fund, from the very beginning, the senior folks in the team, Shankar, myself, Chris, others, we came from financial VCs before. So we were very aware of how things are traditionally done in different VCs, and we saw the good parts and the bad parts. One part we really wanted to focus on was to make it a kind of one team, a together kind of concept, and we all talk about that. But I believe we actually have it in practice. So what it means for us is that we're not hung up on it's my deal, it's your deal. It's us working together, and we literally try to find ways to complement each other because we are very different across the set of team members, and there's many ways that we have deficiencies but we have great strengths from other people, and we complement that. So the examples, I'll give you two examples which are really just manifestations of that, right? The first one would be Preventus, where I talked about this acquisition this morning. In that case, they had this vision 13 years ago when they were founded to enable remote care so that you're getting cared for. If you're like a heart patient, right, you're at risk of dying and all kinds of bad things happening. You don't want to only have the doctor watch over you in the clinic when you visit them. So even 13 years ago, the cloud was sort of there, right? The basic technologies like sensors completely there. The AI was not there yet, but the vision was to get that done. So when Samsung showed up as a potential partner, they were very interested because Samsung could be one of the missing links to connect their kind of medical technology into everyday life for consumers. I think for each of us, for the CVCs we work for, there is some strong company. If your company's not strong, there wouldn't be a VC team. So there's some strong industry presence. What is that? And clearly, your partners are coming to you because of that. So you have to take advantage of that. In our case, it was our brand, our wearable devices, our amazing phone products, all those things that you know about for Samsung. So very straightforward vision to think about what to work on together, and happy to say that we've been active on that with this investment. Second, completely different example. One of our investments in a machine learning chip startup, and we made a bunch of machine learning chip investments. And as a result, we know the industry pretty well. We know the customers, the ecosystem. So when we invested in this other new one, we were able to have make intros for them into the verticals they were interested in conquering, because these are amazingly smart people about machine learning algorithms, chip design also, and so on. But they were not specialists in whatever, let's say, healthcare, right? So we have that. We because of our breadth, we have very strong experts in specifically how to use AI for, let's say, genomics or real world evidence or whatever it is. So we're able to help them with that. So this is using our large corporate parents network and the fact that we as a VC, we look very broadly, so we can connect the dots and we can do things that even amazing founders have deficiencies, which is other industries.
That's very nice. And maybe I'm going to be cheeky here, but I'm going to say, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Samsung is a huge conglomerate company. And I feel like rather than being a negative, you're turning it into a huge positive. You're looking at everything Samsung could bring to the startups. And so I want to really understand that, because I've talked to other CVCs that feel like because their company is so big, they can't do what they want and so on. But I really feel like you're turning it around into a huge, huge strength. Tell me how you've managed to do that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, it's a strength. I mean, we're very, very proud and feel very fortunate to be part of Samsung. I'm sitting here only because Samsung has done such an amazing job in its core business, right? Same with you, same with others on this call, probably. Uh, the size of a company like TDK, of Samsung, Intel, and so on, right? Um, it's overwhelmingly positive, because the reason that startups want to work with our companies is because they see the possibilities. They see the possibility for their world-changing idea to actually get adopted at a scale that they cannot do by themselves. So our challenge here is to make that a reality. And the negative part that you mentioned would be, it's not easy because there's 50 reasons why the big company does not want to change. But there's one reason that they want to change, which is they know that they have to survive. They know they have to do it because they see what happens to the other, I won't say which examples, but very negative examples of those who don't change. And that's why we're sitting here talking today. And let's not forget that. Don't get hung up on, like, okay, I have to take out the garbage, have to wash the dishes. Okay, but I love my life. So in our corporate life, we have lots of things I have to take care of, but we're just privileged to be here representing the company to think about where to put its precious hard-earned dollars into the future. So really try to bring that when I talk to the entrepreneurs, because we can help them, like we just said.
I think the way to summarize it is Samsung and have been a close partner. They've been my customers for more than a decade. They know disruption is coming and they prepare for it. And I think what you're doing is really about making sure that this disruption is well understood. And so I would like to have a feel about how much of your strategic value is about identifying where disruptions could come from, and how much of that is informing Samsung where to go. I want to have a feel of, is Samsung Catalyst Fund already impacting many areas in Samsung where the strategy is influenced positively?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I would say that the principal value is about predicting the future better than we can. That's really what it's about. Everything falls from that, because um, our tech world is so difficult to kind of navigate, right? Things change, and now that tech is a dominating force, we're no longer kind of dependent on bigger forces. We are the big force. We actually cause change, and this makes it even more difficult to predict. I won't mention the specific examples, but from the election, we know these examples. Okay, so we have to be careful what we do. As a company, how do you do that? And to us, it is clear the startups are the crystal ball, the Palantirs of the world. The startups are the ones who are living and breathing 24/7, thinking about the future. They have no choice. They're like desperately trying to run. So how can we find the right ones, and it's not easy to find the right ones, but they're out there. You know if they're out there, and work with them. So the maybe the biggest example of how that's helped us at Samsung is in the smart auto space. So Samsung wanted to go more deeply into the automotive sector. We're already big suppliers in many areas, such as battery, display, semiconductors, and so on. But we saw the coming of EV, smart car, connected vehicles, autonomous driving, and so on. So we began with a pretty focused program of investments, invested in almost 20 companies around the world, everything from LiDAR sensors to AI chips to better display, mapping technologies, and so on, right? And we did not acquire any of those companies. What we did acquire was a company called Harman, which Harman also makes automotive and audio products. So if you're wearing some earbuds, they may be from Harman.
Yep, right
So
there.
yeah, great. And specifically on the automotive side, they're a tier one supplier into the automotive industry. So we completed an $8 billion acquisition. And it was really only possible because we began by building knowledge and confidence and relationships and insights through the investment. So that's exactly the mission that we had. Um, we also have many smaller examples of, let's say, investments that became part of products. I'm talking right now over Wi-Fi product, which is made by Plume, right? One of our investments. And I enjoy using it, but I think the strategic value of something like a Harman is maybe the best pure example.
Actually, for me, this is one more golden nugget, and it's not always obvious for people, but it is during the due diligence that we learn a lot. It's not necessarily the fact of investing that creates the learnings. It's actually learning about the space, the ecosystem, the network. And you gave a really good example where you have clearly influenced the way Samsung is going to execute on a direction, even though you didn't make investments as a CVC. And I like to really say this is a golden nugget because the due diligence is where the learnings come from, or at least start from. And you may actually learn a lot, but not invest, but still learn that it's actually a good place for an acquisition, or it's actually a very bad place for an acquisition. So I think that example you just gave is really good. Let's talk about teamwork, because I can see you have put a lot of focus to make sure your team works as a team and think as a team. How did you make sure, both in terms of recruitment, but also incentives or KPIs, how do you make sure that this feeling of a cohesive team continues? And it's very hard when it's such a big CVC and corporate behind, and you have so many different focuses. So tell us how you did it.
Yeah, it's of course a very complicated story, and we're constantly learning and tweaking. It's been 8 years. We've tried different things. Uh, it's very much customized to the situation of your corporate parent, right? So at a high level, I would say number one, you have to think about your stakeholders. Uh, so the stakeholders for I think any of us would be, of course, there's the entrepreneurs outside, the CEOs, the co-investors, VCs, right? Inside the team, there's the investment team itself. And these are very talented people like yourself. And how do you motivate people like this to stay and to prosper? Without the team members, we're nothing, literally. It's completely, we have no IP. So, okay. And then the interesting part is inside the corporate parent, right? It's complicated, right? There's typically a formal source of power, the sponsor, if you will. And those are the people who are visionary and give you lots of rope to make mistakes and try things. They're the reason we exist. But then there's finance. Their job is to manage finance, right? And we are, at least in the beginning, mostly a loss-making center. So they have to be comfortable. And then there's the business units. And they're the real reason that the company has money to invest. Without them, there would be no CVC. And so you have to think about all of these stakeholders, and then make sure that the team that we have on the ground is aligned to kind of maximize the impact across that. So that's the first thought. And it sounds high level, but literally this is what you have to think about when you kind of design and think about your systems. For example, how often do you interact with the corporate parent? Who does the interaction? How is it done? What do you communicate? When? So all these things are super important, right? And we're always learning how to improve that. And the team specifically, to the point about having very talented people, and fortunately, unfortunately, we're all subject to other like firms recruiting us away and so on, right? So we have to make sure that our team members are empowered. So part of it is that there is a corporate hierarchy. Like you need like one person effectively to be in charge of an org chart. It's confusing to have like five people. So we explicitly separate the corporate functions, let's say some HR process, from the way we make investment decisions and the way we manage our culture. And that is done as a partnership, just like a financial VC, right? And that's important because I think we get much better decisions that way. So it's this kind of interesting dichotomy of your organizational structure. And then when you hire the team members, you make sure that they are fully bought into this approach, which is it's not about your own personal glory. It is our team's track record. If we have a win, it's the team. If we have a loss, it's the team. And we have to be willing to kind of sacrifice our own ego often for that. So we look for that. Nobody is perfect, but we try to look for that to have more of that versus less of that, because we've made mistakes in the past where it didn't work out, and it's because of that, right? Uh, this is especially important when you have a global team, because it's easier to build these very strong personal bonds over the water cooler and so on. If you're seeing each other, let's say in the past before the pandemic, once or twice a year via some global team get together, and then via teleconference rest of the time, you need to make sure that we're committed to each other. And in our business, there's a lot of reasons to get help from each other. So customer basis, expertise, supply chain, they're global. So due diligence process, recruiting, post investment, M&A, exit, all these things are global. So we have to work very closely together. So those are kind of some of the thoughts, I think.
That's very nice. And I will touch on the global aspects because I think that there's a lot of tactical aspects that I think you could share. But I want to really deep dive on what you said about working as a partnership, because I feel like you're combining a good corporate culture with good financial VC mindset.
Mhm.
And tell us a normal, typical investment decision and how it works as a partnership.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious, but not a good way to do it would be to have this investment committee that is off in space. Maybe it's like the CEO plus CFO or something like that. Someone who never touches a startup, and then you bring a deal to them and they decide. It can work if the company is only investing in exactly what they do. Okay, then in that case, it probably works pretty well. Okay. Um, but that's not our mission. Where our mission is to boldly go forth and do new things that the company is not doing. So the key is that we have to have a decision process where we have basically our team gets to decide. And it's very similar to the traditional VC process where you bring in ideas, you debate it, you kind of iterate on that via very Socratic dialogue. You ask questions, you challenge each other. You try not to make it personal. You're willing to just look at data and change your views as time evolves. And you look for dissenting views. You look for red flags, because those are the things that you really don't want to just pass by without some thought. And you manage that on the flip side to make it practical, because you don't want to debate just for debate's sake and go on for weeks and months and do nothing and no one wants to work with you. So it's that kind of process where you iteratively decide, is it worth doing still or not? Is it a really interesting thing, we should dig further, or it's pretty cool, but there's these reasons that it's never going to work. Maybe we just cannot find the right synergies with Samsung. So whatever reason those are, maybe it's the team and so on. And so at some point, the team decides as a group, basically, not via some very formal consensus procedure, but just as a kind of part of our culture is to come together and agree that there are things we don't know, but overall this makes a lot of sense. The gut is that it makes sense, and then we kind of decide with, of course, more leadership from the senior folks with more experience, but very much encouraging everyone to speak up, right? And then we basically can make that decision, and we have freedom to make these decisions.
So I'm going to double click on this because there's a very fine line, and maybe it's more art than science, between a team decision and a consensus. And you did say it's not quite consensus, but can you really explain the difference between it's not consensus, but yet it's a team decision?
Yeah. So the way I think of it is that, like a complicated topic, right? It has so many factors. So first of all, you have to prioritize those factors. So you have some list of the key things for this specific situation, and it's always different. In some cases, it's something about go to market. Other cases, defensibility, the competition, whatever. Okay. So you have a manageable set of the top issues or considerations, positive, negative, that we should think about. The team's job is to make sure that we're not missing anything that's important. Okay. And then the team's job is to make sure that we um, answer those questions to the right level. And that's a judgment call by us collectively. As you know, anything can be chased to death way beyond where it's worth, right? How do you make that call? That's experience, right? Um, so at the end of the day, when you're ready to make the final, well, you could have killed it 3 weeks ago. So, but if you get to the point, it means that there's agreement that these are the key questions, and these are the answers that we have, which may partially or fully address them. And then at that point, we kind of go into the phase of, okay, let's decide um, what is our gut, and let's talk through that. And then we kind of go around. And by that point, because there's no surprises anymore, we've all kind of made sure that these are the issues. And then we know that there's no perfect answer. It's just, there's many reasons to fail. And if you have a perfect deal, you would wait forever. So we train ourselves, I think, to do that again with the guidance from the senior people who can say with experience that I've seen this before, and we try to push the group to make a decision. And it's a kind of group momentum kind of thing that is, again, not by any formal voting, but simply by the conversation. It kind of crystallizes one way or another. I'm not sure
Very
if that
nice.
makes sense.
And depending on the discussions, is that when you start shaping a view about the check size? Are you going to lead, or you prefer to follow? Are you preferring a small check versus a big check? Is that part of that team discussion, or does that come from the person driving the deal, making the proposal?
Oh, that's very much part of the discussion. It comes early on, in fact. So I think it's a mistake to leave the deal dynamics to the end. It may often it's one of the most important topics. Uh, the syndicate, for example, right? You think about how much capital the company will need to get to some nice milestone, like cash flow break even or something like that. You think about what that means in terms of future rounds and who's around the table and all those things, right? You don't want to think about it at the end, because those are absolute killer items that could make you decide to stop. And part of that is, what is the right amount from Samsung? And that has attached to that many implications, right? Like how much we support down the road, how big is the check size. If it's a very big check, it requires more conviction, which typically means that we should get more expert opinions from inside the company. If it's a small early stage investment, not so much. And it all depends, and it's a very important topic to consider.
So let me challenge a little bit, because it feels like depending on what check size is being proposed at the beginning, it's probably going to influence whether you end up investing or not. which could drive the wrong incentives for some people proposing a smaller check to make sure they have a chance to invest versus not. How do you counterbalance this possibly wrong incentive?
Yeah, so this is very interesting, and I've only worked at really one CVC so far at Samsung, right? My prior experience was really a financial VC. But I know at Samsung, it's interesting because it turns out that the sensitivity of the deal to our check size, meaning the desire from the startup and their board to take our investment and work with us, is only loosely coupled to the check size. And it's because, back to your old question, the real
The
reason
value.
is not the money, it's collaboration with Samsung. So we emphasize the value of working with Samsung and with Samsung Catalyst Fund. And that's independent of the check size. We'll work with you just as hard, right? And then the check size is what's natural. So many things matter, the allocation, maybe it's oversubscribed, whatever. So the other advantage that we have, I'm sure many of us have, is that we're not driven by very hard financial metrics that maybe you promise to your LP if you're a financial VC. So we can be flexible in many, many different ways. We just want to basically build a strong relationship with the company. That's the essential thing. To your earlier point, you learn a lot from the due diligence process, but you learn much more on the board, much more. Because if you invested, it means it's a leading company in its industry. It means that the people on the board with you are like the leading lights of the industry. Man, they know so much. So there's such a learning experience. So we want that kind of experience. And then the check size has to make sense because we do have to support a ongoing financial performance to make this make sense.
Very, very nice. And maybe I will double click on the board. Do you see a difference in terms of learning between being an observer versus being a director?
I think being a director, there's more responsibility, right? You have fiduciary responsibilities. You would tend to be more caught up in some of the more kind of mechanics of raising around, hiring and firing, and planning and so on, right? Um, so that definitely is a difference. And there's a lot of value in that because you get to contribute to the company in very significant ways and get to build strong bonds with the other directors for sure. But other than that, in terms of the interaction with the company, that's actually kind of independent, down to the point where some of our investments, without being either on the board, on the observer, whatever, we have strong relationships with the company, and so it's a very good two-way street of value flowing back and forth. So I would say it depends on you as an investor, your ability to build that strong relationship with the CEO, maybe some of the key management team members, and with some of the key board members. It can be independent of the official status. And that is partially because of your parent company's importance, and partially because your own ability, your own reputation, of course.
Yeah, and building intimacy with the management team and adding value over time. Um, so I want to talk about the interaction with the business units. And part of my question is because of your decision making for investments is not related. Actually, you don't have an IC team outside your CVC. I don't think you need sponsorship from BUs because you're taking an option on the future. So without any of the corporate having an influence on your investment decisions, how do you work before investment, during investment, post investment with the BUs? How do you make sure the secret sauce really kicks in?
Yeah, that's a really important and delicate question. Um, First of all, there's the concept of we can make investments independently. Um, that's sort of like a privilege, and you don't want to abuse the privilege, right? It's a privilege in that there are cases when you need to use that, but you don't want to be doing it all the time. That's a bad idea. Why? Because we go back to who's creating the cash flow of the company. It's the BUs. If the BUs think you're useless over many years, it's not a good thing for your CVC team, right? So we should not get confused between the privilege to not have to get support to not caring about support. That would be a big mistake. So we very much care about support. We just don't want to make it so that it constrains us when we really believe that we have something that they're not seeing. Those cases arise from time to time, but often I think the more common thing is that there is some relevance to some part of the BU, and there's often an expert or two in that area, some fellow or architect or someone like that, and you want their opinion because they're really smart people in relevant areas. They give you feedback, very negative feedback. Well, you better watch out because there's a reason. They're kind of dispassionate, right? They don't care. So take that into account. Positive feedback, very helpful, right? So we definitely want to do that whenever possible. And the second thing is, to your other question, post investment, um, that is really where we have to do our job to bring value to the company, because it's not just kind of crystal ball gazing and dreaming about the future, writing fancy white papers. That's for analysts to do, and they make their money that way. Our value comes from helping the company. So how do you help the company? It is not by quarantining the knowledge in our heads and talking on panels. That doesn't help the company too much. It's really by doing the hard work, rolling up your sleeves, scheduling time, knowing who to talk to, who are the stakeholders again, how do you communicate, and they need to get something out of the experience we're having, even if it's not directly what they work on today. Hopefully, you have a receptive audience who wants to think ahead and they can appreciate what you're doing. And then for the startup, what they care about is their revenue growth and leveraging the large, parent company, the CVC, to go to market. And that one is, again, very much we are the servants of our startups. We do the best we can to help them with the knowledge about what the large company is likely to do or not. So we try to be their Sherpas, I guess, right, on that journey.
I like the way you use the word privilege. I think you need to earn the trust, you need to earn these privileges, and they should be taken away if you abuse them, no doubt.
Yes.
You talk about stakeholders, and I really like that. If you were to pick one, who is your customer? Is that the entrepreneurs, the corporate? How do you see that notion of someone is a customer of the CVC?
Yeah, it's clearly the entrepreneurs, right? Everything depends on them at the end of the day. So if you had to pick one, which it wouldn't make sense to pick one, of course, but if you had to pick one for argument's sake, it's the entrepreneur. They make the magic happen.
I love it. Of course, it's a tricky question because you don't have to choose, but I think it shows a priority of everything you do is for the entrepreneurs. And when that magic kicks in, then you get the value that you were looking for.
Mhm.
Francis, I want to ask a question that's probably going to be an interesting answer, but if you could go back in time and tell Francis 8 years ago one big advice as you start this journey, what advice would you give yourself 8 years ago?
Mm. So I think one thing we learned over the 8 years was uh, the importance of what we call thought leadership. Uh, and what by that what we mean is that we want people to think of Samsung Catalyst Fund and Samsung as being in tune with what's coming and being very supportive about innovation, of entrepreneurs, of the upcoming shifts in technology, how it works with society, all these things that we care about. We want to be at the forefront. And it's not about us becoming amazingly smart people by ourselves. No, right? It's about, again, we're like the Sherpas, right? So we want to highlight the best ideas out there, showcase the best experts, thinkers, visionaries, and we work with them, and everything else good can flow from that. So without that, you could probably do a fine job as a CVC, but that's so much fun, I think, because then you're kind of just limited by your existing network and people you happen to know and so on. But by doing this thought leadership thing, number one, you get to learn. This is the best part of our jobs, I think. Every day we will wake up, we talk to this diverse group of amazing people doing new things we never thought was possible. It's just amazing, right? So this is what the thought leadership does also for you. You embark on a process to do that. And so over time, we became more and more active in that. So we did something called a Samsung CEO Summit, invited like 1,000 guests of all the ecosystem players, from startup CEOs to large companies to VCs to academics and so on, and brought a few amazing speakers to speak. We started doing this thing called Extreme Tech Challenge, which is really a way to make sure that technology is going to support society's sustainability needs, the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and so on. So these are kind of examples. We did this thing. Young Son was doing this thing called The Next Wave. It continues very strong. He interviews amazing people like Pat Gelsinger and so on, and has a one-on-one conversation. These are concerted, very focused attempts to help contribute to the community by showcasing the best ideas and visionaries. And we became more and more active in that over time. And I believe it's really paid very strong dividends. That's maybe the first thing I would say. It wasn't obvious to us when we started. The second thing is internally, I feel like as a CVC, you can almost never overinvest in getting to know the relevant parts of your company. Now that's a double-edged sword. So what you don't want to do is become very much caught up in navel gazing and internal dynamics, politics of your company. Because remember, we're in large companies. If we're just talking to every part of the company once a month, you'd be talking to everybody constantly all the time. So you have to pick and choose, and it's not about being so wrapped up in what your own company is doing. It's more like understanding the key people who are going to help this innovation agenda. So who are they, right? The right mindset, the right influencers, the people who are excited and energized by talking to the startups. There are many people like that you and I have in our corporate parents. So building that relationship has a payback that's many, many times. And I think we lose sight of that because, as we said, number one thing is the entrepreneurs, but don't think that's the only thing. That doesn't work either, right? So it's this balance.
It's really good. Thank you. You actually answered one of my questions I was going to ask, which is where do you have most fun? So you already answered that question. I'm going to ask a more tactical, but I think it's useful for CVCs that are looking to grow in more geographies. You're one of the CVCs that has many presence in many places. So maybe at very high level, how do you choose a location? And what would you say when you recruit locally are the pitfalls or the things to really watch out for?
So we have grown pretty much organically by like the next location was always kind of obvious for us. We began in Silicon Valley. The core team that began were just longtime Silicon Valley folks from many other companies outside of Samsung. Very quickly, we expanded to Israel because Israel, we all know, obviously, it's startup nation. It's one of the best places on the planet for startups. Samsung already had a strong presence in Israel, so it's very easy for us to do that. So we quickly added our presence there. Korea was there from the very beginning because it's a corporate headquarters. So there's certain critical functions there that we've had from the beginning. And then we expanded to the East Coast of the US because it's obvious, again, it's needed. Many things happening, whether it's up and down the coast, right, including Canada. And then in Europe, what happened about maybe 5 years ago, right? There was this market shift in the culture and the openness and the excitement. You know this very well. These are countries like there's many countries. I don't want to name one and single them out, but
it's okay to mention France, by the way. It's okay.
France is one of them for sure, right? And others, up and down the continent, right? It's really amazing to watch. So Silicon Valley, I think, is still the best place you have to compare, but it's no longer anywhere close to being the only place, not even close. right? So many amazing things coming out from these countries up and down the world. So it was kind of obvious whenever we had to go to the next place where that should be. Um, and then your other question was, what are the pitfalls or?
Pitfalls in recruiting in a new place you haven't been yet.
Right. Well, VC investment is very local. Uh, there's no such thing as well, you can do it by parachuting in and visiting occasionally, but it's not that effective compared to a committed person who's there to build a long-term relationship. So finding that person who is very well connected locally, yet shares the vision that we have, shares our culture, shares our desire to work closely to help Samsung. Those are the things that are I guess probably pitfalls, because you can easily sort of optimize for one but not the other things. So the challenge is always for all of us to, in our interview, in our recruiting process, to kind of identify. I don't think we have the answer to that, but we just keep this in mind as we search for that person.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned about a committed person, but do you think one person alone in a location is right, or do you think there is a critical mass you need to have in a new location?
Yeah, that's a good question. The tension always is if you add people too quickly, it's harder to integrate. You kind of balkanize, I think, because there's like no set culture. Also, if things change, and one thing we know from CVC is our how like in the Amazon cloud, there's so many servers. Even if one server fails every 0.00001,
Redundancy, yes.
something is failing all the time. There's so many servers, right? Well, in a large company, there's so many components. Something is changing every single month, every single year. So one thing we have to be careful about in CVC is that we have to be flexible. So how do you be flexible in terms of building out your footprint with offices, anticipating that things can change, which are outside of your control. So you think about that, and again, I don't think I have a good answer, but it probably depends on the region the person is in, how homogeneous it is, how easy it is to connect across that, the person you have as a candidate, how comfortable they are, let's say languages or something like that, or culture, and their ability to travel. All those things are key considerations. But ideally, I think it would be nice to have at least two people per site if you can do it. But in reality, it's often difficult to ensure that.
Very nice, very practical. So my last question is, what do you look forward the most for 2021?
Well, we've had an incredible first few weeks in the United States. Huge ups and downs. Yesterday was very energizing for us Americans, and the stock market liked it, right? I think it was the highest upswing on record for inauguration. So we look forward to, I think, science is back. Eric Lander,
Science is back.
yeah, Francis is back. Not me, but the Nobel laureate, co-chair of the advisory council, Francis Arnold. So we have amazing people in charge at the very top, thinking about science, technology, and truth. So I'm very happy to see that. So I'm very bullish about where we're going from here. The pandemic is very, very challenging. We keep learning about the things that we did not know, such as new variants, immunity escape, those kind of things. So a lot of work ahead of us. Again, we are fortunate to be looking at the new things. So in a sense, the more there are challenges, the more there is for us to do. So super excited from that perspective in terms of investment. As I'm sure many of you are. There's just
Thank you, Francis. I think that was really an amazing interview. I'm not surprised you're the top 5 in the power list of global corporate venturing. It was really amazing. a lot of golden nuggets, and I think this is really, really good. Thank you so much, Francis. Thank you so much, 500 Startups. I think we learned a lot today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. Great to talk to you.
It was really good. Bye.